I'd like to ask you, Mr. Irwin, Mr. Navarro, and Mr. Sedlick, your works can be scraped from the internet in a matter of seconds for AI ingestion. Can you explain what goes into creating a single work of art and how long that process might take, starting with you, Mr. Irwin?
Sure. It's kind of the answer's how long is a piece of string, to be honest. It's always different. When we're working in an audiovisual space, be it film or television or something like that, where you're commissioned to work, you have deadlines and you have to come up with the goods by a certain time, and deliver them. When you're working as a songwriter, more like Dan does, you have a little more freedom, and you can work on a lyric, you can work on a song, you can collaborate, you can have a half-written song and then bring someone else in. But everything takes time. Nothing is the push of a button. There is no push-button music up to this point that's any good anyway. I mean, most of it's just, not usable.
I want to follow up on that line of questioning about existing technologies that are there to identify digital works, enhance copyright protection. What challenges are you aware of in the use of these types of technologies for works that are used in training AI?
There is watermarking and fingerprinting used in music technology over and above the identifiers that I talked about. There's technology that currently allows music to be identified even within a program that has dialogue and sound effects over the top of it. You can still identify that music. So, the technology is there for this to be done. It's just a matter of having the will and sitting with the organizations who are doing it and getting this discussion going. I have no doubt that there's a way to track this stuff correctly.
According to reports, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, is valued at $29 billion. And Stability AI, the company behind Stable Diffusion, was valued at around $1 billion late last year. By way of comparison, can you give us an idea of how much the average composer's salary would be?
It's very difficult to say because the way first of all, we're not governed by any kind of collective bargaining. We're not a union or anything like that, so we're very much independent contractors. It's easier to talk about ranges for television shows, an hour of television, a feature film. Those sort of budgets are easier to quantify, and then of course it comes into the experience of whether you're an entry-level person or a very experienced high-level person. All of those change the rates. And then of course on the back end, where we get our royalty streams, where a lot of us make our money, the performing royalties that are collected by the societies like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, they are dependent completely on the number of performances of those works that include your music. And that's the same for audiovisual and for streaming and everything. So it's very hard to say. Some years it's almost like a farmer. Some years you have a bumper crop. Next year you mightn't see much at all.
Can you talk a little more about what threats generative AI poses to composers and songwriters? What actions do you think we should take to ensure that your work in artistry is protected? Actually, you've talked about the threats. Can you talk?
I can talk. Do you want to talk about the threat, or do you want to talk about the solution?
I think you've talked about the threats.
Yeah, some of what's in my written testimony. One of the things that the music industry has done particularly well in this area is collective licensing. And they have, as I just mentioned, for ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, they have a way to monitor performances for mechanical royalties, which are the physical royalties, that you have sound exchange, and then there are streaming royalties as well through the Music Licensing Collective. And there are reciprocal organizations set up all over the world. So,
how would we apply that to OpenAI?
Well, I think music is probably more easily applied to music than it possibly is to some of these other art forms, because every piece of music that's registered has a registration number, a work number, a recording number. Every artist has their own number. I have what's called an IPI number, Dan has one. So they're already in the system. You don't need to reinvent them. You just need to make sure that they are attributed to those works as they're being used or you know, logged or however you want
How
to
do
do
you
it.
determine what works are used in generative AI?
Well, that's I think something that will need to be determined. I mean, I write music. I'm not a technologist. I think what was really interesting in your little Wikipedia piece you read was the word inspiration. And I think inspiration is what we need to keep hold of here, because there's a big difference between getting a book and you know, you want to emulate your idol, you want to emulate the Beatles, or you want to emulate the Rolling Stones. You know, in my case, growing up, my parents bought me sheet music. The sheet music was Mozart or Beethoven. It was public domain, but they still had to buy the sheet music for me to learn. And I learned how Beethoven writes music, and I learned how Mozart writes music, and I learned the Beatles, and I learned all these things, and I learned them. But every time, in your case, the inspiration was, did they hear it on the radio? If they heard it on the radio, there were royalties being paid. If they bought the sheet music, there were royalties being paid. If they bought the record and took it home and played it, there were royalties being paid. And that's really where we are now. Yes, they were learning, but that inspiration was paid for at every time along the way. I was just going to say that certainly in my own experience, and I'm sure for the other people here, you put in a lot of hours from a very young age to train to do what you do and become really good at it. And, you know, to dismiss that in any way, I think that's the problem that a lot of us are having is, you know, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who wrote, you know, 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours, you start to know what you're doing. If the machines can do it that quickly, what is the incentive for us to keep going? What really is it? I mean, for years and years and years, for as long as you can remember, go back to the court composers, the arts people have been traded on, oh, they'll do it because they love doing it. They love doing it. And it's true, we do love doing it. But at some point, the love doesn't feed your family. And that's the real harm here, is there has to be a way for us to coexist. That's all we're looking for, really.
Anything you wish to share with us today that you haven't already testified to?
I'm going to follow on what Dan said. I'm a little distressed that we're calling this training, to be honest, because in my mind, we train athletes or animals. We don't train machines. We equip machines with data, as the technology people like to call it, but as we like to call it, music. It's very Orwellian how the tech industry manages to change terminology on us. It's not data and content to us, it's music, it's photographs. It's not file sharing, it's stealing. It's very simple. They're the sort of things I wanted to get into the record that I didn't get to say.
So if a company wanted to license your work for AI, would you be willing to grant permission if you could agree on reasonable compensation? And you go in whatever order you would like to go.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. We're professional people. We get paid to do what we do. So why wouldn't we want to license our work, you know? And the more work we get out there, the better it is it makes more incentive for everyone to create if there's compensation to create.